All right. All right, here's Chief Todd. Just give this a few more moments, everyone. Thank you for your patience. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Heather Kimball. I'm the Hawaii County Council member for District 1, which serves from the Wailuku River all the way up to Waipio and even a small portion of Waimea. Thank you for joining us tonight, and my apologies in advance for not being able to hold this in person as we had originally planned. As you know, the COVID numbers are increasing rapidly, and our original location was a place that also served as a child care center, and so we felt it was not prudent to meet in that location given the circumstances. With us tonight, we have several guests. So I would like to just start by introducing everybody here. We have Chief Todd from the Hawaii County Fire Department. We have from Hawaii Wildfire Organization, Nani Barrett and Elizabeth Pickett. From HELCO, we have Jennifer Zelko and Kevin Walchen. From Kamehameha Schools, we have Marissa Harmon, who is their Director of Asset Management. And I believe we are supposed to be joined by Glenn Sacco from R&D, although I have not seen him sign on yet. The agenda was published for tonight, but we're going to make a little bit of a shift. We're going to start with Chief Todd that will give a recap of a lot of what he shared already in the meeting that we had in the gym right after the fire. And then we will go to the Hawaii Wildfire Organization folks to talk a little bit about their FireWise program. At that point, we'll take a break for Q&A just because you'll probably have some questions that should be specifically directed by them, and we don't want you to forget by the time we get to the end of the program. And then we'll go to the folks from HELCO and finish up with Marissa from KS. So without further ado, I will pass the floor over to Chief Todd.
I hope you didn't think I was running away. So make sure I close the door so that no one was walking in on me while I'm talking here. Again, my name is Kazuo Todd. I'm the fire chief for the Hawaii Fire Department. And as we kind of spoke about a month ago, no, it's been a couple months now. We have moved into a very dry period. We've had about 4 years of wet weather in Hawaii. And recently, because of changes in the weather patterns and such, we're moving into a dry year. So I'd actually met with Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization. It must have been a couple weeks into my being appointed into this position, and been told by them and our national weather forecasters that we're going into this dry period and we needed to be worried that there's a potential for fire as things dried out. And I immediately went and told all our county council members and the mayor, just in case, because I wasn't sure how that would affect our budget, and I wanted to be kind of upfront with them just in case we did have fires. I haven't had much time to focus in on following up on the Paauilo fire because it was the first fire of what's now 8 different wildland fires that we've had on our island over the last 4 months. So we're averaging one pretty decent sized fire, and our most recent one spanned over 40,000 acres, which probably everyone who's watching or in this meeting is going to be familiar with. It is an unprecedented time on our island. We have a lot of fuel that has grown up over the last 4 years of wet weather. And because of the dryness that's currently going on the island, we got to be extremely careful. And so one of the things that I'd advocated for on the meeting that we'd had down in Paauilo was the implementation of things like FireWise and working with our community organizations such as the Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization that really put in the time and effort to try and help educate our community and our residents on how they can remain safe within their own homes and the actions they can take to protect their community. And obviously, I know Councilwoman Kimball's been working on the governmental side to see if we can't make improvements or changes within the local situation, whether it be water or other issues. And I realize we have a few other people on the table to also assist with some other possibilities as well. That's pretty much the main reason I came to answer some questions and listen if there's any other issues. I apologize, I haven't had a lot of time to particularly focus in on the Paauilo fire, as it has gotten extremely busy on the island, and it seems like I'm spending more time in the EOC than I'm spending in my chair at the office to do regular work. So it is what it is, but I'm here to answer any questions, and definitely I'm here to support. You're muted.
You know, I never do that, and I got caught tonight. Just mahalo, thank you for making the time out of your very busy schedule to be with us here tonight. And please just thank all of your staff for all their hard work over these last few months. Definitely appreciate all of our first responders out there and how much work they've had to put in, particularly with this last fire on the west side. So with that, we'll move to our guests from Hawaii Wildfire Organization, Nani Barreto and Elizabeth Pickett, if you'd like to go ahead and take the floor.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having us. I prepared some slides so that I can point to some images and things as I present tonight. So I'm just going to take a second to share my screen. All right. Can I have a thumbs up that you can see it? Okay, it's working. All right, great. So I am Elizabeth Pickett, and I'm here with Nani Barreto, who's also on the call. We are co-executive directors of Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization. And just for a quick overview, what I'm going to go over tonight include what's on the screen right now. So essentially some important things to know about wildfire in Hawaii. Sort of at the zoom out, and then we'll zoom in and really learn some specifics and actions that you can take even this weekend, even tomorrow, to get your home, family, and community safer and more prepared for withstanding wildfire. And then we have some next step opportunities for the entire Hamakua that are coming up, and also for every sort of neighborhood within the Hamakua who might be interested in Firewise and some of our other opportunities. So I'm going to share with those at the end. So diving right in, just quick background on Hawaii Wildfire. We've existed for about 20 years. And originally we were founded by our fire agencies, and we have many of them on this island, and they came together to say, there's so much more than just putting out fires. There's preparedness and community resilience and education and fire breaks and water dip tanks and access and all these things that within our bureaucratic limitations, we might not be able to get to in the way that we want to. And so let's form an entity that can. And so that's who Hawaii Wildfire is. Our work plan changes around because we're really responsive to what the needs are from our community members and our agency partners. And it's super collaborative. We like to cross boundaries and work with all different kinds of people whenever we can, because we know that that's what it takes to really get prepared and ready for wildfire. So that said, I'll do that zoom out description of wildfire in Hawaii. And essentially it's simple. Basically, Hawaii is burning. And that's something that not everybody has really absorbed. We are a fire-prone state. We collected all the fire records from across all the agencies for the last 15 years or so. And we know that the size, scale, scope of our wildfire issue in Hawaii matches, rivals, sometimes exceeds the most fire-prone states in the Western US that get a lot more publicity for their fires. But the issue is our behaviors and our culture hasn't really caught up to that fact. And part of it is wildfire is under-publicized, it's underfunded, it's under-addressed. It's been growing over the years, and we haven't really taken that on as part of our identity as a fire-prone state, but we are. And it's because of two factors. So I'll come back to this a lot during this presentation, but it's people and it's vegetation. So we have human behaviors that are igniting fires, and we have a landscape that's ready to burn and allowing fires to get really big. And so we will be dealing in both of those areas in this presentation, but also on the ground and in the kinds of things that we can do to take action. And we know that the problem is growing. And part of that is because, well, we know that wildfires are increasing every year in number and in size. And you know, we basically have been tracking fires over the years, and now we have almost 100-year record because we've gone back and we can see that there was virtually no fire, and then fires started, and at this point it's off the charts in terms of how many fires and the size of those fires. And there are consequences for that. There are impacts that maybe some people are more aware of and some that you might not be aware of. But essentially, we have damages from summit to sea. So we lose native forest. It's replaced by fire-prone grasses that are also burnable, and we keep losing the edge of the forest and gaining more and more fire-prone species. So our wildfire problem is literally growing. Yet when fire comes through, we have damages to the soil that makes for post-fire erosion, that smothers coral reefs, impacts fisheries, recreation, water quality. We have changes to the soil that inhibits infiltration. So we have changes and reduction in groundwater recharge. And all of these things are not necessarily connected in people's minds to wildfire, but that's part of what happens. And there are impacts air, land, and sea. I mean, we have during fire smoke, after fire dust. And so these consequences are broad, they're long lasting. Years to decades later, we might be experiencing the after effects of a fire that had happened, you know, before or historically. So those are all the kinds of connections that we need to make, because we need to take action in many of those areas. So it's about public safety and also the health and integrity of our natural resources. And something really important to know, I said it was humans and it was vegetation. Well, on the human side of things, 75% of our ignitions are accidental, and from the records that actually have a cause stated. So we could do better on investigating and figuring out causes, but from what we know, these are the 4 causes. It's not always cigarettes, and only 1% is lava and lightning combined. So they're not just nature. And so people need to really be careful, and we need to adapt our behaviors for that. So we need to put our campfires out cold. We need to be very aware of when we're using sparking equipment. Vehicles are a huge source of fire, traffic accidents, but also just people pulling over on dry grass. These non-native grasses are from places like South Africa, where it only takes heat to ignite them. It's not necessarily a spark. So even just pulling over on dry grass, you drive away, you don't realize that you started a fire. And then fireworks. And so these are the 4 primary causes of accidental ignitions. And we do have an arson problem, but with 75% of just accidental human choices, that's a huge reduction if we could start chipping away at our awareness and our, you know, change our behavior to be more fire aware and preventative. And then the unfortunate part is where those sparks and accidents and heat sources come in contact with this fire-prone vegetation, which is eucalyptus, as you know, all the way down to fountain grass and other invasive grasses. That's where we have a recipe for wildfire. So it's the interaction between the vegetation, the conditions, and and ignitions. And so at this point, more than a quarter of the state is covered in extremely flammable, easily ignited fire-prone vegetation. So we just have completely the equation to be seeing these fires increase. And then you add in seasonal or periodic droughts, and the situation even increases. So when we're thinking about fire, we have to think about sort of this equation. We have ignitions and fuels. That's what we would call burnable vegetation. And where those come together, we have, you know, the equation for wildfire, and those impact natural resources. That's a picture of a burning native forest on the bottom left. We have threats to our communities and public safety. That is Waikoloa from the 2007 fire. That was 35,000 acres. As a quick side note, that fuel break that you see in there was done by Hawaii Wildfire. It was our first project, and we put it in. It was finished like 4 days or something like that before the fire came through. And it actually allowed emergency responders to get in and have some access that really helped to protect Waikoloa Village. So we know doing something about it actually really does enhance protection. And then we also have impacts to lives and safety. And so what do we do about it? We need to reduce our ignitions, better behaviors, better choices. If it's dry and windy, don't use that sparking welder and grinder or saw or whatever you're using. Do it another day or another location, but just being aware. Don't pull over on dry grass, etc. We need to manage our fuels. And then we really need to understand that we're not going to prevent them all, even with really with better behaviors and managing fuels, we're still going to have fires. It's still going to happen. And so at that point, we need to make sure we've done what we need to protect our natural resources. So our communities, and also optimize the emergency response side of things so that they can address the fires that do come. So these are all the areas that we need to work, and something has to happen in all of them in order to really have this, to move forward to a fire prepared, fire aware, fire resistant sort of community. And the really important thing about this is that firefighting is the last line of defense. And people think, well, isn't that what the fire department is for? And it's like, well, that's only if we haven't been proactive and we haven't done all of our parts, or we haven't done them enough, or we, you know, it's the action is in prevention and in preparedness and in mitigation and community risk reduction. It's not just waiting, and it's not random that we have fire. It's predictable, and there's something we can all do about it. And so the things that we can do include making sure we know our role and we're taking action. And so everyone has a role to play, from, you know, like Chief Todd talked about, budgets. We need budgets for prevention, preparedness, community education, community hazard reduction. We need budgets for, of course, more for suppression and all that's required to do a really good job, like access and water. And then we need post-fire response of restoration, cleanup, soil protection, etc. And then we also need to be firewise from the start in our development, in our building of houses. There are things we can do to prepare and protect a community and a home as we are building it. And so, you know, developers and architects and engineers is a role for everyone to play. And that includes land managers who are managing fuels, and of course, homeowners, which I'm going to dive into now. So what can you do? What can you do this weekend? What can you do your own self? Because that's where it really needs to start, is taking action with your family and around your home. We really like to recommend that you get familiar with the Ready, Set, Go program. Ready, Set, Go is a national program that was developed in response to some really gnarly stuff that happened in Australia. They used to have a program called Stay and Defend. And the idea was that since every evacuation tends to be the place where there is congestion and danger and fatalities, they had a program where it was like, get your whole house ready and then stay and defend it. And then they had this really unfortunate occurrence where they had these mega fires that joined together, and there was no escaping, there was no safety, and they had a lot of fatalities. So the US learned the lesson from that and developed Ready, Set, Go, which is have everything prepared in advance and then be ready to evacuate. And so that's what's in the Ready, Set, Go. We actually just published or put out the 2021 version of this, and it's Hawaii specific, and it's endorsed by all our fire agencies, and it was developed with the national model, but also modified to be specific to us in Hawaii. So we encourage you to check out the whole thing. I'm going to touch a few tidbits tonight so that you can just learn a few things. So we're going to start off with with Ready. I think there's a delay. There we go. Okay. So for the Ready portion, the main thing is you're going to be managing your vegetation around your home, getting rid of dead branches, debris, combustible materials, making it lean, clean, and green is the saying, if you want a catchphrase. Hardening your home with non-combustible building materials, and then having a family evacuation plan. And so I'm going to give you some details on each of those. But the main concept to remember is that the ready portion is really thinking about the fact that it's not just a flaming fire front that will get your home and property exposed and threatened by fire. Fires can start from flames and from radiant heat, but also from embers. And in the kind of wind that we have, these embers can travel miles. And so you want to think about that when you're doing stuff around your home. Anywhere an ember can land, you just want it to like fizzle out. You just don't want to give it anything that would allow it to burn and become another fire and start burning your property and home. So a lot of these recommendations are really focused on ember ignitions, but they work similarly for any other kind of fire hazard. So that said, start close to your home, sweep your porch, get everything dead debris all around. If you have plants that are all touching your structure, you might want to rethink that, particularly under windows, because if that burns for a long time, it's hot enough, it might crack your window, open it up. It's the most vulnerable part of your house because an ember can then get inside your house and burn it from the inside. So if you do have vegetation, you want it to be really clean and hydrated and all the leaf debris totally picked up so that it won't really burn as easily. But essentially that you want to just be thinking about that 0 to 5 foot zone as being the place you really want to start and then start working your way out. There's a rule of 10 feet. So if you mow your grass and have it really short, you want to have 10 feet to the nearest tree branch in height and 10 feet in between your clusters of vegetation. Because what you don't want is just a wick where one thing leads to the next, or the ground touches, you have tall grass that burns a shrub that then gets up into the trees and gets up into the canopy or your roof. So it's really just about keeping everything sort of spaced out and clean. And these are some examples of the 0 to 5 foot zone, just keeping it clean. In this case, there's, hydrated vegetation, there is gravel, there's a lot of ways to do it, but the idea is just keep it really clean in that 0 to 5 foot portion. And if you have combustible materials or storage of things under your house, it really needs to be cleaned out. It needs to be, ideally you wouldn't have any, but I know that most of us use our under of our house for everything we don't have room for. And so keep it clean. And the FireWise recommendation in that case is to use 1/8 to 1/4 inch non-combustible screen and to screen it in so that you're thinking about if an ember comes, it'll hit the screen, fall down, not burn anything, and then you're in a lot better of a situation. And there's a lot of things you can do with plant choices. These are actually, images from Waikoloa, but the idea here is that you don't want to have plants that if they don't get enough water, they drop tons of leaves because you might not get to cleaning all that up fast enough. And it's you probably don't want to spend a lot of money on water in those drought occasions. And we know that over time with weather patterns changing, that we're having more episodes and longer episodes of drought. And so what you want is plants that don't drop their leaves if they don't get enough water. And so FireWise plants match up really well with native plants because native plants can weather the storm if you get the ones that are local to your area. So those are just some ideas. And the trick here, this is not, obviously it's a mainland photo, but when you've done all of these things and it's, your grass is short, it's wet, you have clusters of vegetation, nothing really around your house, and lots of space, which we call defensible space. It's basically that emergency responders can come in and defend your home against the fire and keep the fire off because they can get in and because it's worth saving because it's not embers starting fires all over the place that can't be addressed. So a FireWise house can survive or has a greater chance, much greater chance likelihood of surviving a fire. And then the last piece of getting ready is to make your emergency plan. And in the Ready, Set, Go guide, there is one in the back. This is the old one, but the new one is improved from this. And the trick to this is don't just write it out yourself or think it through. Actually write it and share it with your family and practice, because you want to know where your go bag is, who's going to grab the medicine. Does your elderly neighbor or your neighbor who doesn't drive need a ride? Are you going to be responsible for that? Do you want to check in with them? Maybe you should practice. Where's their go bag? You want to practice and you want to know all those details because the idea behind Ready, Set, Go is that you want to leave as early as possible. And so you have everything ready. And I don't know if you can tell what's going on in this picture. Sometimes it takes people a minute to see. But when we move on to set, because we just went through all the ready, we're all prepared, we've done all that work. The next portion is to be paying attention. And so if you can't see what's going on the screen, there's a giant shark behind these divers. And the idea is that like fire doesn't have to sneak up on you. We know, like Chief Todd said, we know when the forecast is looking bad. We know when the grass has gone from green to yellow to brown to gray. Like we know it doesn't sneak up on us, and it's not random. It's really, really predictable. We don't know if there's going to be an ignition or not, and we're all trying really hard to make sure nothing gets ignited, but we do know that the hazard is high, so you can be aware. And there are two kind of times to be having that situational awareness. The first is seasonally or throughout the year. Just like I said, watching for when conditions start to dry out. And it might not always just be in the summer. It might be any time of year, because we're seeing these pockets of drought happen throughout the year increasingly. So be aware of that and use that as your cue to get ready, and practice your plan, get your yard all cleaned up, and just be paying attention. And then during a fire, you also want to really be paying attention, because fires can change direction very quickly. So don't get complacent and say, oh, it's way over there on the hill. You should be really paying attention and be ready to leave. And so, like I said before, the evacuation is usually where there's congestion and danger. I'm just going to play this and talk over it. I'll try to talk loud enough for you to hear me, but this is when the majority of fatalities happen. And this is not the time to run out and hose off your roof and mow your lawn and hurry, pack the go bag. Did you get the contact solution? This is not the time. You need to be out early. And evacuation is, it's a scary time. People are frantic sometimes. The idea here is that you want to be as prepared as possible. Your home is lean, clean, and green. You have your go bag, you have your plans, you picked up your neighbor, and you want to just go. The recommendation is to go before you're even told, because you can go to dinner, you can go to the beach, you can go to friends, you can do something outside, and you get out of the way. And so then evacuation is better for everyone, and you're already safe. You can always go back home if you didn't need to evacuate. But the Ready, Set, Go program really recommends just get out of the way as soon as possible, and don't become a search and rescue because you stayed so long, and don't use water resources that the firefighters need. Don't be doing all your work at that last minute and then get at the back of the line for traffic. And so the idea here is just be ready, and you can leave early knowing with, peace that you did all that you could way ahead of time. You were ready. And so in that idea of staying alert and knowing what to do and where to go and where the shelters are and what's happening, we really encourage you to sign up for all of the alerts that you can. So there's a state emergency management one. We have a county civil defense alert system. All of our elected officials are using their social media to make sure people are getting information. So be familiar with that. Sign up in the places you need to sign up so that you can have the best information and the correct information to keep yourself safe. And then just remember, there's a lot more, and there's also a lot available to help you dive in and learn about this and take action. And so we have the Ready, Set, Go booklet. We have a 2-pager that you can share via social media or just look at it, but essentially it whittles it down to prevent these accidental ignitions. And on the backside, here's a few things you can do around your home and yard with your family and with your community. And so on that idea of doing something with your community, this is where I really want to talk about the Firewise program. So at the national level, there's a Firewise USA program. It's run by NFPA, which is the source of fire, fire code that each state adopts. And so it's been around for a long time, but in Hawaii, we've seen just this blossoming in the last maybe 5 or 6 years. We have 15 communities across Hawaii who are nationally recognized Firewise. And really, it's a bunch of neighbors that get together and say, yeah, you know what, we'll take the lead. We'll organize some work days. We'll make sure our community gets the information, learns about fire, takes action. And so, at this point, because we have 15 communities, we really want to see more communities doing that, because what we're seeing is across the state, communities are going through the same challenges and they're all sharing with each other. And so Hawaii Wildfire manages that program on behalf of Firewise USA and in partnership with State Division of Forestry and Wildlife. And so we work together to help and find resources where we can to help support your projects. And it's available to you, and it's a really awesome program. And what we notice is that it doesn't have to start with tons of people. It could start with a few, and then it grows over time as people start to realize it's something they need to get involved in. And one quick note is that the Mana Road fire that we just had, the 3 communities that evacuated are Firewise recognized. And I can't wait to learn from them, their lessons learned, and also to see if the membership in the Firewise or the participation grows in their communities. But I'm hoping that they all felt prepared thanks to all their efforts to be Firewise. And so I'll just end it with a few things you can do next. So of course, tonight, this weekend, it's just good housekeeping, do your yard work and write your emergency plan. Second, whether it's through the Firewise program or not, there's a lot you can do with your neighbors to sort of shift that culture to one of personal responsibility. There's a role we all have to play. Learn about fire, learn about what you can do. Here's all these resources. Hawaii Wildfire is just a tiny nonprofit, and we're just doing everything we can to get the message out there. But what we need is everyone else to be sharing with their neighbors and getting it out wider than we can. There's also some fun things you can do in terms of work days and chipper days and vegetation waste removal, and everybody go mow your lawn on the same day. We've seen a lot of different iterations of what it looks like to work within your community, but it's pretty cool when neighbors get together to make it a fun thing and do it collectively. And then finally, I just want to let you know that there's a community wildfire protection plan about to be developed for the Hamakua. And you can see like the darker red areas are the ones that we're currently either working on or about to work on. And what these plans are, plan is a misnomer. It's a terrible name actually, because so is community, because really it's the broader community, it's agency folks, it's all those people I mentioned in the beginning. Everybody needs to be taking action in their different ways. So everybody of different professions and fields and residents are invited to come together, come up with their concerns, their recommended actions, and help prioritize projects that need to happen. It's not binding, it's not regulatory, but it's a document that once it's in place, it opens doors for funding to get those projects done. And honestly, it's a valuable process that starts a long-term neighborhood action sort of culture. So it's a plan, document, and a process, but we wanted to let you know that there's one coming up for Hamakua. And we will get the word out, and so will Councilwoman Kimball, when that meeting is going to be. I'm thinking it'll be late fall, but I'm sorry these images are blurry, but we've done these all over the state. They're very effective, and they're really interesting. So we want to encourage you to attend and just be prepared to talk about or come to the table with your wildfire concerns, priority areas to reduce fuels and manage fuels, and also just priorities in terms of what needs to be protected and what we should do first. And if we only have a little bit of money, what should we do? What can we do without money? And basically, it's not just like all our complaints and fears. It's really like, what can we do? Who's going to do what? How can we get started? Let's do it sort of process. So just, we really encourage you to participate in that. And so I'm just going to end it with this slide saying that, remember, there's a role for everyone to play. And when we're all doing it and participating proactively together in our different roles, and then together collaboratively on some things, there's greater protection for the community. So everyone here tonight is already, you're already doing your role, and by learning more and taking action, and we're thrilled to see that. So thank you for letting us be here to kind of give all these details. And if you need to get in touch with us, I accidentally erased Nani's email on this, but you can get in touch with either co-director at directors@hawaiiwildfire.org or Elizabeth or Nani at hawaiiwildfire.org. Feel free to get in touch with us if you want more information, if you're interested in Firewise, if you want Ready, Set, Go booklets to pass out in your community, we're just putting in a big order right now. We don't have any left, and we just did the 2021 version, but we'll have them soon, and we're happy to share. And just as a quick side note, we have so many resources. We have coloring books, activity books, resources for teachers, for land managers, for ranchers, etc., and lots of data and lots of maps. And so if you're interested, or you end up finding yourself in need of or a want of any of those things, just let us know, because we're the only entity in the state that thinks about wildfire all year long, all day long, with a whole staff of people thinking about it. So we are here for your wildfire needs. And that's all I have.
All right. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I appreciate it. A lot of great information there. And I know that, just so you folks know, this was a pretty compressed presentation, trying to get in as much as we could tonight. So they'll are available, of course, for questions via email, but we'll take a quick break here and see if folks in the community have any questions for either Chief Todd or our Hawaii Wildfire folks. Starting off with a question from the chat, do we have any more information about what caused the Paauilo fire?
At this time, the fire is going to remain undetermined. Our investigators did go out and take a look, but based on the witness, lack of witness testimony, basically, and just talking with our firefighters, the fire was fully involved upon our arrival on scene. And nothing on the scene would indicate that it was caused through incendiary devices or anything like that. But again, there was nothing we found that would indicate why a fire would have started, just that we had it. Unfortunately, with a lot of these wildfires, I used to be an investigator and spent about 6 years doing it. There's often a lot of debris, a lot of random pieces of paper and junk that people throw out of their cars as they're driving and things like that. And so it's really sometimes hard to tell if this is just trash that's been thrown on the side of the road, or if someone used this to start a fire or something like that. It becomes a little difficult. At this time, we weren't able to find anything that would indicate one way or another what started the fire. And so unfortunately, that's probably going to be the final result unless someone comes forward.
Thanks, Chief Todd. Anything that you can say about the response time to the fire in Paauilo specifically, and maybe just talk about response time in general and some of the challenges there for Hamakua specifically?
So I'm off mute. So we can take a look right now. Our primary responding units were Engine 8 and Brush Truck 8, which are the closest ones there. And we had a dispatch time basically of around 12:08 and an arrival approximately 18 minutes later. They're a little bit farther down the road. We do have volunteers that are a little bit closer, but unfortunately, those volunteers usually have a longer lead up time because they're not sitting at the station waiting for a call. First, they got to get the notice that they're being called back, and then they got to report back to the station and then respond from the station. So while we do have volunteers closer in the area, I think their response time was actually several hours out because they got to come back to the station and drop whatever they're doing. They might be working or doing something else on the side. So while we did call them out, only looks like about 8 minutes after the fire was initially reported, we'd dispatched our own units, and 5 minutes after that, we were already dispatching volunteers because of the calls coming in. But getting our volunteers to drop what they're doing at work and run home and put on their gear and jump in a truck sometimes can take a little bit of a lead up. So it's a little bit of a different situation for them. And then for this particular fire, we had quite the number of units, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but I think on the fire department side, we had approximately 15 units assigned, and then from the Department of Forestry and Wildlife, they brought in, I believe, a number of units as well. I know their personnel totaled somewhere around like 24 personnel and 8 or 9 vehicles. So quite the response for a fire comparative to our most recent fire where we dumped 9 choppers, 27 dozers, 52 apparatus, and 140 personnel, but that one was a little bit bigger. So that answer the question?
Yeah, that was they're very thorough. Thank you, and I appreciate you giving us like the real numbers right there from on the screen. I'm curious. Do we know how much the response to the Paauilo fire cost the county? Do we have a number on that?
You know, definitely in the long run, I'm looking to get better analytics on our data. Unfortunately, it hadn't. The way we do our accounting doesn't make it easy. And so I'm working for better systems to do pre-accounting so that once we're on scene, we can just do some quick math with our personnel. But our older systems that I've adopted now that I've become the chief have been more to just wait for the bills to arrive and then figure out and pay the bills there. I do know, I think on the dozers that we brought out to the scene, we spent at least 20,000 on the dozers for the dozers we had, because we had 5 dozers working on the Paauilo fire to encapsulate it. And so at least the bills I saw were at least 20,000 on that, but I don't have a grand total because we also had, you know, a lot of cost in terms of choppers. We did hire private chopper for that particular fire, Chopper 3, which is Pilot David Okita came in and did water drops for us. And that runs us, I think it's around 1,500 an hour to bring them out. So there's another bill there. And obviously, you know, it costs for recall and overtime personnel and everything else. If I had to estimate it, county probably spent somewhere in the range of $100,000 to $150,000. And if you're looking at total cost, maybe higher because of DOFA and what they charge there. I think annual daily cost somewhere around $23,000 to $24,000 a day for each day they're deployed. And I think we were on scene for about 3 days with DOFA. So their costs were probably around 75. And our cost, because we were paying for some of the equipment and everything else, was probably maybe 125. So maybe 200,000 total.
Okay, great. Thank you for all of that. And yeah, we should definitely acknowledge the help that we got from DOFA in responding to the fire in Paauilo. A couple of questions here that maybe the Hawaii wildfire folks can answer, maybe you, Chief Todd. What is the best way to protect livestock if you can't evacuate them? We've heard it's best to put them in a heavily grazed pasture or very green pasture. Other ideas? So I don't know if who wants to take the lead on this, but any suggestions in terms of protecting livestock?
So, you know, I gotta actually say, when we talk about protection of our homes and dealing with firewise and things like that, one of the best actual overall protections is you know, having livestock around the area that are constantly basically bringing the grass down to a low level and maintaining it that way. The action of having, you know, herd animals come through an area helps fertilize rotational crops, and some of the methods that are coming out nowadays are actually a really good way of not only, you know, raising animals, but also of maintaining good fire breaks around your property. I think we had a few families that I talked to up at the Paauilo gym when we'd done some sit down and discussion about it afterwards, that had mentioned that the fire, you know, they'd been really concerned, but the moment it got to their pasture land that they had around the house, it pretty much died. And unfortunately, it did take out the fence that was at the edge of the property. So they did sustain some damage and some of the animals ended up getting out and wandering around. But it is a very good thing to maintain a good defensible space and highly recommended.
Thank you. Elizabeth, you want to chime in?
I would just add that I only scratched the surface in the Ready, Set, Go part of the presentation, but there is, I mean, the best thing to do is to have a plan for your animals as well. Also just regular pets, cats, dogs, etc. But in the case where it's just unfeasible, or you don't have a trailer, you have way too many animals to actually have a place to put them or a way to get them out. It's true. In the shortest grass, in the least burnable vegetation, bare soil or bare lava if you can. I mean, just basically getting them out of harm's way where any flames can actually travel is in the right direction. I mean, we try to recommend like have a plan and move them, but where that's not possible, Yeah, that's, and also if there's any water resources or ponds or anything like that nearby, animals naturally tend to go there during a fire. Sometimes they'll even go in, and so they're smart too. And so if you're lucky enough to have those kinds of areas, it is a good Plan B option.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. Chief Todd, you and I have talked a little bit about this already, but the ability to get a hydrant in the little community that's Mauka and south of the gymnasium there. You know, we've talked about it from the standpoint that the line going out to that neighborhood is a smaller size and doesn't have the capacity. We've talked about a couple of ideas. I was actually recently in Alaska and saw a tank that they had for a community there that was isolated from water lines. Any more that you want to add to that, Chief Todd?
So, you know, there's definitely some different options in terms of getting things done. I realize we're talking about down at the bottom by Nakale Loop. Is that correct? Right. So one of the things that could be done was, while the hose itself is small, if you're not worried about how quickly it's pushing the water, if you have a large tank that has an open top, it can be used for dipping. So one of the things we thought about was, you know, as far as the fire department operations, I hate to say it, but a lot of stuff is not accessible by our trucks, but our helicopters are actually able to go and grab water and take it wherever it needs to go. A huge factor in our suppression of the Mana Road fire, which was 40,000 acres, was the fact that we had 9 choppers just taking water and pushing it. Okay, so on Kaohe Road is where you're talking?
Yeah, that's right where near the fire started. So it's closer to Hilo and Mauka side of the road.
Okay. Okay, on the Kaohe side. So that one doesn't seem to have a lot of excess space, and there's a lot of trees. So chopper operations in that area would be difficult. So for that one, you know, working with Department of Water Supply to try and upgrade that. The main problem lies in how god-awful expensive it is to bring in water lines, because you got to dig up, you got to drop. And I can tell you right now that the minimum size that a fire truck can pull from is a 6-inch line. And preferably, if it's one direction 6-inch line, will have the potential on a fire truck, if we start pulling too much water, of cavitating and crushing the line because of the engine sucking too much water at a time. So ideally, even with the 6-inch, we want the 6 inches to be coming from 2 directions. So water is actually being supplied from the grid in multiple directions to make a 6-inch line work. Ideally, you want like an 8-inch or more. I am not an expert on how you would fund the acquisition of a hydrant or the water line. I would say perhaps working with your local county council member and trying to seek federal funding or something like that for hazard mitigation or something. Definitely we'll do some research on our end for the fire department, but having lived in a community myself in Wainaku, I can tell you getting public money to get into what's considered often private roads and things like that, or small communities, is pretty difficult sometimes. We haven't been able to get the county, hint, to pave our road, which is private. I don't know if the council member would like to help me with that, but anyway, yeah, I don't know how you do it. One of the things I think is a definite possibility is having dip tanks, because you can feed that on a slow drip. And once the tank's full, that can be used to bring our chopper in and do some work there. It's not going to solve the long problem of having a good water source for our trucks, but we're also working on that with having a lot of tanker trucks that have a water supply on their own that we can bring in. So, and you know, in a fire like this, we'd probably send out our tankers from Hilo and they can come out with 3,000 gallons at a time.
Great, thank you. And actually, that's a good transition just real quickly to one of the questions that we got prior to tonight's meeting via email, which was, are there dip tanks in the area now that could be used for transporting water? to your knowledge?
So depending on the day, DPW has tankers that are often in the area, whether it be Waimea or Honoka'a, and then the Hawaii Fire Department has a decent sized fleet of tankers nowadays. We have 3 that are running 3,000 gallon, and then we have a number of wildland tankers now that are running only 1,000 gallons, but designed to take the water off road so that even if we're gotta get up into the bushes and stuff like that, we have access to it.
What about those tanks that the helicopters would dip into? Do we have any of those in the Hamakua area?
Well, there are a few locations in Hamakua that, and actually we did pull from down the road closer to Opihilala Gulch. There was a reservoir over there, and our choppers were pulling from that reservoir to fight the fire. And so also like reservoirs aren't necessarily a bad thing. If people are willing to put in dig a really big ditch and line it and then let it fill with water, that's also something that communities can be used in terms of fire suppression later on, because our choppers will go and pull from it and make use of it.
Thanks, Chief Todd. Before we go on to Eric's question here, which I think is a good transition to our conversation with Helco, are there any additional questions for Chief Todd or Elizabeth before we pivot to the next topic?
Hi, Heather. Yes, this is Rob again. I'd like to follow up, if I may. I have a question for the chief regarding.
Sure, go ahead.
It's troubling that the fire jumped across the Belt Highway. What standards for tree trimming or removal, especially so close to those power lines that run along the highway, should be or could be established? Or was that a one-off situation that couldn't be prevented? It just seems to me like the Belt Highway is a natural fire break. If it needs to be expanded somehow or somehow tweaked and eliminate the attendant hazard of those power lines being so close to those big eucalyptus trees, that's a concern. I'm wondering how you see that. Thank you.
Hey, Rob. So I can tell you on the tree side, there's probably 2 issues that concern me about the trees. Obviously, one is the potential for them to interact with power lines and to catch fire or to break power lines and such. So, from a fire prevention standpoint, we definitely do advocate. I do know that in high wind situations, trees that are close enough are going to start rubbing on those power lines. I, as a firefighter, was almost abandoned by one of my drivers who decided that the arcing on the power line was too scary and he needed to leave while I was not in the vehicle. So I've been there in the middle of the night watching trees rub up on power lines, and it's not exactly a pleasant feeling. That said, on the trees themselves, the other issue that is of concern from a fire perspective is, for this fire, while I can't weigh in on whether or not the trees and the power lines had anything to do with the fire, we heard some reports of noise, like a boom or arcing kind of maybe sound, but no witness and no one can corroborate on that. The trees themselves, which weren't involved in this fire, do occasionally at the edges of the tree line have limbs that are growing down low. And these are potential transitional fuels. So if you have a grass fire and it's able to follow the leaves up into the top, we can transition from a regular fire into a crown fire. And so from the fire perspective, this is a concerning situation. So, when we talk about maintenance and the conditions that the trees bring, definitely, having them far away from power lines is something that we would advocate for from the fire perspective, but also not only the distancing from the power lines being a thing, but also branches that are coming out that would allow fire to transition into the crowns of the trees would be something that we advocate for limbing those so that we can keep brush fires that are on the ground level and not running through the tops of the trees, because once it gets up there, it gets pretty scary.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think an additional challenge on that particular day was the amount of wind that we had, and there just was a lot of fuel on both sides of the road. And these invasive grasses like guinea grass or fountain grass on the west side, they're so flammable and so easy to ignite that just 1 or 2 embers coming over from the Makai side over to the Mauka side can set things off. I'm gonna, just in the interest of time, to make sure we have plenty of time for our Helco friends and KS, let's transition now to Jennifer Zelko and Kevin from Helco.
Mahalo, Councilmember Kimball. Kevin Walgen and I really appreciate the invite and the time this evening with the Hamakua community. I am the Director of Government and Community Affairs for Hawaiian Electric, and we wanted to provide the community with an update on our resilience work, as well as the collaboration with our government and private partners. And then we're certainly here, Kevin Walgen and I, to answer any questions or any concerns from the community. The resilience on Hawaii Island and keeping the lights on is important, but number one for us is always the safety of our communities. We work year round to make the grid more resilient, and this work does include tree trimming as well as inspecting, maintaining and upgrading infrastructure, which includes the poles, lines, and various other equipment. We also wanted to mention, because it's coming up in a couple of weeks, from August 23rd, that's Monday, August 23rd through Thursday. Go ahead.
Oh. No, I think we just had somebody off mute.
Okay. Again, from Monday, August 23rd through Thursday, August 26th, we will be conducting our quarterly inspection of our major transmission lines, and this is done by helicopter. So we wanted to make sure the community was aware of that. Again, those dates are August 23rd through the 26th, and that's the inspection of our transmission lines on the island. We're also always looking at new technologies that can help us better manage the grid and really restore power faster to our communities across the island. In general, the top three causes of outages across the island are vegetation, equipment deterioration, and then the sudden loss of generation, which we call under-frequency load shed. And specifically for the Hamakua district, about 32% of the outages that you've experienced from 2018 through 2020 were caused by vegetation. Again, that's about 32%. In 2021, so for this year, about 59% of the outages experienced by this community have been caused by vegetation. And I want to say, we know that the power outages are very frustrating. Many of us have been working from home, and our kids have been distance learning. And so our priority is improving that reliability and minimizing interruptions to the community. On the emergency response front, we work very closely, really hand in hand with our Hawaii County Civil Defense and first responders like the Hawaii Fire Department to prepare for emergencies, including brush fires. I really appreciated, Elizabeth, your presentation and really what the Hawaii Wildfire Firewise team is doing to help prevent wildfires. We do have a wildfire mitigation plan and launched initiatives, including we use drones to help identify vulnerable areas and then determine the best course of action to prevent a wildfire situation. I also wholeheartedly agree that prevention is key, as Elizabeth was saying. So I wanted to mention here on the call, we have our handbook for emergency preparedness, which is a really great tool. It's available in several different languages. The handbook can help you prepare yourself, your family, your pets for emergencies. If you need a hard copy, and I think we're going to put it in the chat, please call 969-0137 and we can get them to you. They're also available at Ace Hardware and Ben Franklin stores. And then they're available electronically as well at our website, which we're going to put in the chat here. I mentioned our private partners earlier, and we really value our relationships with organizations like Kamehameha Schools and being led by folks like Marissa Harmon on the call this evening, and they're helping as well to strengthen our community. So we really look at this as a collaboration amongst everyone. I also wanted to note the collaboration with our council folks. Councilmember Kimball has been really great about reaching out. She's not shy about reaching out when there are concerns from the community. We really appreciate that, so that we, along with others, can quickly address them. And I think that's so important. And that goes for our legislators, because they're really representing the various communities across the island. With that, I'll turn it back over to Councilmember Kimball, but Kevin Waldron and I are here to answer any questions when we get to that point of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen and Kevin. We will just transition immediately here to Marissa, and then we'll stop again for Q&A. So Marissa from KS, I'll pass it to you now.
Mahalo. Aloha ahiahi kako. Mahalo nui, Councilmember Kimball and all the panelists and the community for being here tonight for this really important meeting. For those of you I haven't met yet, I'm the Director of Asset Management for Kamehameha's Ag and Conservation Lands across the state. I am based in Hilo and have been working for KS about 14 years now. We're really thankful for the opportunity to participate this evening. We all have a shared interest, which is the vitality of our community. So I'm pleased to share some information about Kamehameha's Aina as we continue, as Jen mentioned, to build these stronger relationships with each other. But before I get into the specifics about KS in Hamakua, I did want to provide some foundational information. We believe that Aina is core to our Native Hawaiian identity and well-being. It frames our shared history, traditions, and relationships. And we're deeply rooted in the land legacy of our founder, Keali'i Pauahi, who really set the foundation for which we steward and care for these lands today. On Hawaii Island, we steward 297,000 acres in support of our educational mission. And these lands are managed in balance with our economic, educational, and cultural, environmental, and economic and community values. We employ about 800 people across the island and educate 1,600 students per year at our K-12 campus and across our 12 preschools. And we also support 35 community collaborators across the island. Specifically along Hamakua, we have approximately 39,000 acres from Wailuku River to Waipio Valley, which makes up about 10% of our land holdings island-wide. We acquired most of this land, 30,000 acres, during the 1994 closure of Hamakua Sugar. And about 9,000 of those acres were already in our legacy from Kauai. We own and operate a preschool in Hamakua that serves 30 students. We lease out commercial spaces in Paauilo to the post office and Earl's store. And we offer 10 residential rental units in the area. We also work with a variety of community collaborators like Hui Mau, Ha'ola Owaipio, and Pohahai Kalani, as well as others. We consider our Hilo lands part of the landscape that we look at the Hamakua coast. And just to give you an idea of what's happening in Hilo, we do support a variety of farmers on our lands. UH's Go Farm Hilo Training Center is on our property. And we also offer post-harvest processing certified kitchen to the Ulu Co-op and its members. They aggregated over 141,000 pounds of food at our Alai site this past fiscal year. Since the acquisition of Hamakua Sugar, we did reposition the lands in a variety of ways. Some of those mixed uses that I went over earlier. We also have about 60 farmers and ranchers in Hamakua. We have 4,600 acres dedicated to pasture, variety of small farms, mixed use, 6,000 acres in conservation. And as you know, the original plantation, about 13,000 acres was planted. Specific to the forest, so the forest was planted between 1996 and 2004. And over time, the lease was sold twice. And our last tenant surrendered the property in December of 2016. So we took 2017 to strategize how to go forward with this standing forest. And in February 2018, we issued a request for proposal for the entire forest. And we had a partner in Hawaii Forest, but unfortunately they backed out that June. So we went back to the drawing board in October 2018 and issued a second request for proposal for a smaller acreage, for acres we knew we wanted to turn over to other uses. And so we were able to issue a short-term license in August 2019 for 3,000 of those acres, which also span from Waipio to Hilo, so pockets throughout the coast. And then we took 2020 to re-strategize on the rest of the standing forest, and the pandemic also contributed to some of our planning work. So this past June, we issued a request for proposal for the remaining 6,600 acres of standing trees. This time we tried a different route. We hired a third party Mason, Bruce, and Gerard to issue the RFP and also manage the process. They have a broader international network, so our hope was, and it did, cast a wider net. Bids were due very timely, just yesterday, so we're awaiting our contractor's review and assessment of the bids, and we hope to have a selected bidder this fall. Some specific notes about our trees relative to brush fires. So I heard to share our perspective on our trees relative to brush fires in the past. Can you guys still hear me? I have a note that my internet is unstable. Okay.
Yeah, you kind of were stuttery there for a minute, but I think you're back.
Okay. So the dominant species of this forest is eucalyptus grandis. And we've often seen brush fires die out when they hit our tree stands. And there are several reasons for that. These trees are self-delimbing, so the lower branches do shed, so there's no ladder, providing ladder fuels for fire to reach the crown. So I do want to say we've never had a crown fire in Hamakua. That's important for us to mention that. Our trees have a high moisture content, about 50% content water. I've personally seen the trees literally dripping water after harvest. So that also contributes to a really moist environment. The humidity is greater under the plantations. The understory vegetation is relatively greener, and wind speeds are less under the plantation compared to outside of the tree stands. So oftentimes we do see when a fire reaches the understory, the burning slows and spreads slower and then gets to die out as was evidenced, and then did move on from there. Post-fire, we also see that tree roots stabilize the soil. So just to summarize overall for Hamakua, we got the lease back 5 years ago and we've been working on the future. We did those 3 RFPs. We've also tried a variety of land use changes. So you might notice in O'Okala below the highway, we have 1,400 acres of standing trees being grazed now by cattle. And so that's an ongoing project. We also have about 600 acres of previously harvested lands in a new grazing lease in Paauilo on the Waipio side of Paauilo-Malka Road. So that's getting underway. We've also worked with Hui Mau. You may be familiar with them. They do the after school program for Paauilo School, and they're also doing cultural restoration at Poholalele Point. Right above our rental units in Paauilo, they've taken about 2 acres of formerly harvested lands, cleared and ground the stumps, and transitioned them back to farmland. So that's a really exciting project for us to see that transition going forward and learning from them all that it takes. And they're actually expanding that project in Lower Paauilo right now with standing trees. So we're going to meet up with them next month and learn from them what's been happening in their area. And then as Jen mentioned, we really are working to improve our relationship with HELCO. We've had a couple meetings already. We will continue to meet going forward on really improving the area, reducing impact to our community. And so in summary, it has not gone as planned in all aspects, but we're here 25 years later, and we see ourselves continuing to be here as a perpetual institution. And as the next generation of land managers responsible for Aina Pauahi, looking at decisions that were made 25 years ago and figuring out the best go forward path. We do recognize there's more to learn to build our resilient community and continue to adapt to change over time. And I just really wanted to express Hamakua is a priority for Kamehameha, and we are also part of this community too. And so we definitely want to be able to contribute to a thriving Hamakua. So we're thankful for the opportunity this evening. Thank you, Councilmember Kimball, for bringing us together. Sure, we'll have more convenings in the future. Mahalo nui ya'opo.
Thank you so much, Marissa, and we certainly appreciate you being here tonight. And I'll just say that Marissa is kind of new to her role there as the asset manager, and Jen is sort of new to HELCO, and I'm of course very new to my position. And so we're all kind of working together to learn a little bit about the history. There's a lot that we don't know that wasn't recorded. A lot of the folks that were involved in some of the early decisions are not around anymore for us to ask those questions. So it's been a collaborative effort between the three of us to kind of look at where we are now and where we need to go. And I want to say that I really appreciate that. Marissa talked a little bit about some of the things they are doing right now in terms of the fuel load under the eucalyptus tree, which, of course, was the issue in the Paauilo fire. It was really the guinea grass underneath the eucalyptus that was really burning. It moved very fast because it was very dry, but it wasn't very, very hot. You talked a little bit about some areas where you're trying to graze under there. I'm very excited about the program where they're converting the harvested area into new farmland, planting ulu and other native food crops. I encourage everybody to pop by there and see what they're doing up there behind the post office. Marissa, anything else that you guys have on your plate that you're thinking about in terms of reducing that fuel load that comes from the grasses that's growing underneath the eucalyptus?
Sure. So, I mean, just reducing fuel load in general, I think everyone recognizes we've heard it tonight a lot, grazing, but also that requires fencing. So grazing more land will take some time. We need partner ranchers that can invest that kind of capital to build fencing and then also build their herd. And so that is something we're constantly looking at. Yeah, I think that's a short answer I'll try to give so that we have time for other questions too.
Great, thank you. And maybe you can talk a little bit. I don't know if you can or cannot because it is an open RFP, sure. But does the RFP include just the harvest, or is there also a component of it that would talk about what happens after the trees are harvested, and understanding that this is an open RFP and maybe we sure. Can't go into some of the details. Is there a little bit you can say about that?
Definitely. So I think I do want to make it clear, we would like those trees harvested just as much as anyone else. So that's number one. And that was the first ask in the RFP, that this is a harvest request for proposal. And if the proposer chooses, they could submit a second piece, which is a proposal for reuse. So we didn't want to restrict it so much. There are folks who are just interested in harvesting and leaving, which would allow us to turn the land over to another use. And so that was our first and foremost ask. And so being open-ended on the reuse side, we didn't want to be too restrictive on that either, because there are a lot of innovative ideas out there now for agroforestry, just other innovative ways of farming and growing and improving the conditions of our property. So we're hoping that there's some of those innovative proposals in there, the second stage of the ask.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I agree. Hopefully there's some innovative solutions there, particularly ones that yield drawdown impacts. Okay, and that's actually a good question. So talking about the climate change as one of the primary drivers of these irregular, or maybe they are not, we should say now that they are going to be regular climate patterns of more drier periods, lots of wet periods that cause a lot of growth at one time. I'm sure you folks have all seen the area that has burned, that grass has come right back with the rains that we've had. What are there any aspects, are you guys considering climate change and the ability to draw down induced carbon sequestration, either through soils management or through alternate uses of the property, Marissa?
Yes, so my team focuses on asset management of the properties themselves, but we have other teams within KS that we work across the line with, and we have a natural and cultural ecosystem team who also has a sustainability component, and they are actively involved in carbon credit program exploration, sustainability aspects. So I would say the general answer is yes for Kamehameha. We do see it as a whole system. We do, even in our historical traditional values, acknowledge whole system management, right, with looking at ahupua'a management. So yes, we are considering climate change, weather pattern changes, carbon sequestration. I know I'm not gonna be able to keep up with all the comments while I'm also thinking and preparing answers, but I did see a question there about carbon sequestration. So as I mentioned, this is actually less than 10% of our holdings on island. So we do have lots of natural vegetated areas in the upper reaches of all of our ahupua'a. We have our very large Kilauea forest in Keohoka'u up in Volcano, which is really one of our more pristine native forests. We also have active koa planting that we're doing for future koa stands. So I know sometimes for our communities, Kamehameha is what it is in their community. So that's one reason I try to do kind of the foundational overview is we do balance our portfolio in different areas that maybe communities may not be fully aware of because it might be on the other side of the island, it might be in an inaccessible area. So when we look at carbon sequestration, we are looking across our portfolio and not just at the 8 or 9% of Hamakua, but the larger balance of how everything works together.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think that area of yours in the volcano area or Ka'u was part of a pilot project with Hawaiian Hawaiian Airlines on some carbon credits. I think I remember that. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to kind of transition
Sure.
and just to clarify for folks tonight. So you already have an RFP in place for some 3,000 acres of the
We have a
eucalyptus.
license in place for
Yes, and then this RFP is for another 6,000 or so acres, and that's basically all of the holdings that you folks have in eucalyptus, right? Or
it was a total of about 12,000 acres. So we had 2,800 previously harvested. With the 3,100 acre license, that brings us to 6,000. And then this 6,600 acres is the balance. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So the folks that are bringing up the concern in the chat about the trees that are particularly close to the power lines, those are included in the RFP that's out right now. Is that a correct assessment? Okay, so in response to that question, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. So we did meet with Jen folks at Helco earlier this week, specifically talking about mile markers in various lines, and at least 8 miles, I think we immediately identified are in this RFP and have been, actually we prioritize certain areas requesting that bidders put in their forestry plan to harvest certain areas first, and most of those miles were in the priority harvest area. So we are coordinating in that sense also with Helco on timing and looking at, we're planning on having a successful bidder and moving into a harvest contract. And so just coordinating the logistics of how that rolls out in terms of Helco's priority line areas as well. And I do want to mention Helco's lines sit within the DOT right of way. And the distance from our trees to the line does vary in some places. I think Jen mentioned it's as broad as 25 feet in some areas. And I think everyone's pretty familiar with the regular trimming and maintenance that Helco does along that line. We all get stopped in the traffic every now and then when Big Island Tree Service is doing their regular maintenance. So we are definitely committed to coordinating on all fronts with Helco going forward. And a lot of it is about building these relationships. Like you said, we're all fairly new in our position, so really appreciate that.
Great, thank you for that. Kind of a little bit of a follow-up, some questions about it until such time that this harvest takes place and there's a RFP agreed to. What are KS's plans in terms of maintaining the existing fire breaks, perhaps putting in some additional fire breaks where the trees are close to properties, in any work being done in that area?
Sure, we did map out the current fire breaks that were built, or I guess dozed as a result of the Paauilo fire. And unfortunately, some of those were in the middle of the property and not necessarily closer to the village and Ko'ohevi homestead. And part of that is because the fire had already moved past those areas, so the fire breaks were built higher. So one consideration with fire breaks and building new ones is the permitting it would take in terms of the county having to do. It's probably going to be larger than 1 acre in size, so we'd have to look at, and maybe that's something, Heather, we could talk to you about in terms of permitting, if there are any exemptions available. It's all mostly previously managed cane land, so oftentimes that's helpful with looking for exemptions in terms of having to do archaeological studies. But I think just having the general public understand we can't just go build a fire break. And then, we have to go through the proper channels of getting them permitted.
Thank you for that, Marissa. And yeah, the grubbing and grading permits and road development and fire break development is all something that I'm spending a lot of time on looking into heavily right now, as pertaining to the fire breaks, but also roads in limbo and other issues that we have that pertain to that. Shifting now to a question for our HELCO folks. The question is, when a tree from a private property falls on the power lines, resulting in a need for replacement, what does that cost us? What is that impact on the county and per pole and line and all of that?
So I can try to answer that question. Sorry, it seems like I'm delaying a little bit. But for us, it depends on what the damage looks like. And normally what happens is if a tree from a private landowner is impacting or can impact our line, we normally send them a letter, especially if we know that the trees are possible impacts to the line, especially if it's a hazardous tree. We deem that as imminent hazard. If we send them that letter, right? In other words, there was some kind of pre-warning and it happened, then we bill back the landowner for the cost of the repair. And that repair varies. Can be anywhere from a few $1,000s to as much as $20,000. It just depends on what breaks when the tree falls and impacts that line. I hope I answered that question on cost.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And I think that, the context here is it's really important to understand that HELCO and KS, they are talking and meeting and working through this particular area, both just in terms of hazard and potential hazard, as well as the outages that have been happening more recently with the wind events. Just wanted to follow up a little bit around the preparedness issue again. Marissa, I know you and I have talked a little bit about planning for that exit for the emergency evacuation if they can't get through the main roads. Maybe you and I working together to come up with some agreements for people to use either roadways or infrastructure, I guess, within the KS system. So I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit. You and I are in kind of very early negotiations about that and trying to understand where some of those are. We know that there's one at the end of Old Stable Road, but you want to say anything about that?
I do. So just for the broader community, Kamehameha has, well, in at least recent history that I can speak to, have often worked with county and civil defense on emergency routes, most notably during the 2018 eruption, both in our Puna lands and also in Volcano as roads were fracturing. So it's not uncommon for us to provide right of entries to County of Hawaii to, really also be responsible for use of those roads during that time. I mean, obviously you probably have emergency management or police available directing traffic through these normally private agricultural roads, crossing some of our, in this case in Hamakua, it would be former King Hall roads. I know, I think Rob's on the line. He's reached out to our asset manager to work on a right of entry for access through one of our roads that come down through our rental units. And so I think we're also open to that. And I think most importantly, Prior to Chief Todd, I'm not sure who worked with KS from the fire department side, but I believe our land operations staff has a regular communication with the Honoka'a station and others for various combo locks to key areas for ingress and egress during emergency. And so we can definitely commit to keeping that conversation and update regular with the fire department. So I think we have various paths for working together with the county via council member as well as the fire department to ensure that we do have identified emergency routes ahead of time and that personnel do have access to those gates.
Thank you, Marissa. And I'll have everybody know. So the Hamakua CDP Action Committee has identified determining where these alternate methods, routes for egress might exist. And so we have a couple of the CDP Action Committee members that are specifically focused on helping me with some mapping. We have quite a few resources within the county in terms of where roads should exist and who owns them. And so we're going to spend some time looking at adding to it. There'll probably be a crowdsourcing element where we put out a map to you folks and you can actually draw in and say, oh yeah, there's another egress over here. And hopefully from that, we'll have a good database that we can share with communities. So when they develop their emergency preparedness plan for their families, they have access to some of these other routes in advance. You know, my goal really is, you know, protection of health and safety, make sure that people have all of the resources that we can possibly provide in events like this fire. And so part of that is just information up front. Where are the other ways that you can go? Where can we come to an agreement with KS beforehand to make sure that people have access to gates and things like that. And with that, I hope Francine doesn't mind. Francine from the Ahuloa Neighborhood Watch. She and I have been, well, mostly she, I should say. Mostly Francine has been working on putting together a curriculum for communities to develop a community emergency preparedness plan that's based on FEMA resources. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, Francine, but I see you're here and I'm actually very excited about this. We're gonna do a pilot launch shortly, test it out, see how the curriculum works, and then hopefully bring that to all of the communities up and down the Hamakua coast. So Francine, I hope you don't mind, do you want to say anything about the program that we're working on?
Sure, Heather. You know, it's funny. I carry around the HELCO documents and I carry around the Wildfire Organization documents. They're part of materials that I would use in this course. The thing that's taking a little time is we're having to reconfigure this, what would have been a 3-hour workshop into an online version. And that could create an opportunity for more sessions and more in-depth information. But the focus of this workshop is to get people writing the plan because, you know, as you heard several people say tonight, you know, you need to get an emergency plan and put this information about hardening your house or, you know, how to deal with your utilities, put that in your plan. But people often don't get around to making the physical plan or getting their supplies list really solidified. And there are thousands of sources. There are hundreds of documents on civil defense's links that I think people get overwhelmed. And then something comes up and it's like, oh, I want to learn about wildfires. Well, there's a whole lot of different hazards that we have the potential for here on the Big Island that we need to prepare for. And you could create a plan that's an all hazard plan. So I'm trying to work with taking the best of everything we can find from somewhere else, putting it together in a really Ohana friendly document that people could sit down with their family and say, okay, let's think about this. Where are our vital records going to go? Where would we evacuate to if we had to? And just make it a really practical document. And I'm doing all those parts of that myself too, to see just how long it takes. So thanks, Heather, for taking the lead on this, and we'll get it rolling with some version of an online test to see you know, how we can roll it out.
Great, thank you so much, Francine. And again, sorry to put you on the spot, but I'm very excited about what we're doing in this area and since I saw you here, wanted to take the time to highlight it. We are now at 7 o'clock. You're free, if you had questions that were not answered tonight, to email me, heather.kimball@hawaiicounty.gov. You can also call my office, and that number is 961-8828. And if you have questions for our panelists tonight, either the folks from Hawaii Wildfire, Chief Todd, or our friends from HELCO and KS, feel free to reach me, and I'll connect with them and share your questions, so that we're keeping everything transparent, keeping the conversation going. Again, thank you to our panelists tonight, Chief Todd, Nani and Elizabeth from Hawaii Wildfire Organization, Jen and Kevin from HELCO, and Marissa from KS. Appreciate it. And mahalo to Francine too for chiming in at the last minute. Again, this will, if there are folks that you think would benefit from reviewing tonight's information, it will be available on the Facebook page, and then we'll also upload it to our YouTube channel at a later date, so you can point people there. So again, thank you everyone for being here tonight, and stay safe out there and work on those emergency preparedness plans. Okay.
Aloha.
Thank you.
All right.